Report on Human Rights in Armenia for 2021. The United States Department of State has published an annual report on the state of human rights around the world. The report on Armenia noted several violations concerning the Yazidi community. The report of the U.S. State Department has covered the situation around the illegal persecution of human rights defender Sashik Sultanian, the head of the Yazidi Center for Human Rights, quite widely. The report noted that in 2021, on July 29, the Armenian authorities charged Yazidi human rights activist Sashik Sultanian under Article 226 of the Criminal Code, which prohibits actions aimed at inciting national, racial or religious hatred or humiliation of national dignity. This criminal prosecution was initiated for expressing his opinion that the government is not doing enough to protect the interests of the Yazidi minority from discrimination. If found guilty, he faces 3 to 6 years in prison. The NGO group warned that the case will prevent any public discussion of issues related to discrimination or the human rights of minorities. Human Rights Watch called the prosecution malicious, and the criminal charge fabricated. On August 6, 2021, the Ombudsman stated that his office shares these concerns, noting that even if some of Sultanian's critical remarks were inaccurate, he should not be prosecuted. Most national and international human rights groups, as a rule, acted without government restrictions, freely investigating and publishing their findings on cases of human rights violations. However, the government's prosecution of the Yazidi human rights defender was a significant exception. While some government officials cooperated with them and took their opinions into account, civil society organizations stated that there were few meetings with government officials, both online and in person, and the government ignored or did not seek the opinions of NGO experts in several important areas, such as freedom of speech and the press. In other areas, such as reforms aimed at creating an impartial and independent judiciary, the government collected reports and recommendations from civil society, but it was unclear to what extent these recommendations were taken into account. The government has not taken any action to protect civil society organizations from misinformation or threats, including threats to harm individual activists. After human rights activist Sashik Sultanian gave an interview in which he described the problems faced by the Yazidi community in the country, on July 29, the authorities charged him with allegedly inciting hatred. International human rights organizations called Sultanian's statements illustrative examples of legitimate protected speech and called the prosecution malicious and a threat to democracy, concerns shared by the Ombudsman. They also noted procedural problems in the case, in particular the fact that the investigators refused to provide Sultanian with information concerning the investigation or the grounds for its initiation. One person questioned as a witness in the case reported that the investigator told him, Western NGOs should be closed. The report also touched upon the facts that Yazidis periodically reported that they faced discrimination, including in cases related to property disputes. There have been isolated reports of social discrimination and graffiti using derogatory terms against them. The report of the U.S. Department of State touched upon the participation of women and representatives of national minority groups in the socio-political life of the country. According to the amendments to the Electoral Code, women in Armenia should make up at least 30% of candidates for elections to the National Assembly. The law provides for an additional seat in the National Assembly for each of the country's 4 largest ethnic minorities, Yezidis, Kurds, Assyrians, and Russians. 4 members of parliament represented these constituencies and were elected by the main political parties, rather than being directly elected. The report pointed to the acute problem of access to education of national minorities. The enrollment and attendance rates of children from ethnic minority groups, in particular Yezidis, Kurds, and Moluccans, are significantly lower than average, while most simply do not receive a full secondary education. Only a few schools across the country offered courses in Yazidi, Assyrian, Kurdish or Greek at the primary and secondary levels. These classes were not part of the official academic program and were not regulated. Yazidi parents continue to complain that the classes do not meet any standards and are largely ineffective. According to an NGO report submitted to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child for 2019, Most Yazidi children grew up speaking their native language and practically did not speak Armenian when entering schools. The lack of preschool educational services in most Yazidi villages created problems for Yazidi children who had difficulties in school and lagged behind their Armenian-speaking classmates.